Phil, welcome. We're going to turn it over to you, and you can lead us from there.
Sure. I'm just going to share my screen here. Is that up and going there now?
Yep, that's good.
Wonderful. So this is simply kind of like us and our culture, our team, our place, and it is not right or wrong. It's just kind of how we function, and we will kind of throw some things out there, and if it, I hope that you will find it helpful in one way or another, encouraging in one way or another, yeah, I just hope that you find it helpful in one way or another. There's 3 different sections. At the end of each one, we'll stop for some Q&A, whatever the case might be, just for clarity, and we'll go from there. But I want to start by just talking a little bit about formational moments for me, as a human being, as a dad, as a pastor, as a person. My dad was a pastor for a long time in the CBAC, and I remember early in my ministry, he would often say to me, because I was in an associate role at the time, he would always say, how would you want to be led if you ever found yourself in a lead role? How would you want to be led if you ever found yourself in a lead role? And in my life, how those 2 things have shaped me as a pastor is just serve them well, serve the people that I lead well. And I try hard to demonstrate on a daily basis, at the very grassroots level, a very organic level. If anyone needs anything done, I'll help them. I will help them move tables. I'll help them, like, down to the small nitty-gritty, nowhere to be found in the job description. I just try to serve the team well, the best I can with the gifts that I have. So that's one of the ways in which those formational moments have really helped and shaped my life. And then the other one is prayerfully avoid the things that I didn't enjoy. Like, I remember being an associate pastor in several environments, and kind of like writing down, not that they were bad things, but just kind of writing down, man, I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy that. And if I ever find myself in a lead role, I want to prayerfully avoid the things that I just did not enjoy about kind of pastoral work and team stuff. So those are the kind of the 2 formational moments that shaped me early in my life, that have helped me in one way or another in the role I find myself now. And from there, kind of walk into the actual kind of dialogue around kind of team. And these are the 3 sections, kind of a culture, building, and accountability. And this would be true for both paid and volunteer. So there's not really a line that's divided between how we interact with, or how we recruit or build, or any of those things. It's kind of all the same space. So this first one, we'll just kind of talk kind of culture a little bit about who we are as a church family, as a team here at Cornerstone. And again, this is not right or wrong or better or worse. It's just kind of who we are. Number 1 is, whether you are a paid person or volunteer, you instantly are given a giant bag of trust. Like, you instantly start from a space of, we will be all in on you, your ideas, your heart, your wherever you want to go. It starts kind of in that space. And I think if you were to ask any of our staff or any of our leaders that are volunteer, that becomes one of the obvious things right away that they would say. And in that same space, there's an awful lot of freedom. I know that word's been hijacked lately, but our people, volunteer and or paid, have an awful lot of freedom to go and do and to think and plan any area of their ministry. It's quite fun to see them grow and express all of those kinds of things in the context of who we are. We love to take risks, and these kind of all build on top of one another. There's an awful lot of trust. There's an awful lot of freedom to take big risks in ideas. And I remember several years ago, Pastor Gordon, our Stratford site guy, he's like, I want to do church on Tuesday nights. And I'm like, all right, let's do church on Tuesday nights. There were certainly, that was like the truncated version of a conversation, but to take those kinds of risks, this past summer, Tyler, our Montague site, he's like, I want to do church on the waterfront in Montague. And I'm like, all right, let's do church on the waterfront. So all of these things kind of build on top of one another, but we love to take those kinds of risks in the context of who we are. There's an awful lot of grace for ideas that go bad, and you don't know if they go bad or not until you're on the other side. And no one gets in trouble for trying. No one gets in trouble for doing. No one gets chastised for those kinds of things. We learn all along the way. And I know that on the other side of risk, and sometimes things don't go as well as we had hoped or planned, there's a tremendous amount of grace, not just for me, but our whole elders board, our church family. There's never it just lacks kind of a finger pointing, trying to find someone to blame or some kind of inquiry or investigation to figure out what we don't want to ever do again. And I just so much appreciate that about our culture here in the context of our church family. And then the last one is we just try to have an awful lot of fun together as a staff. We laugh together. We often sit around a big giant boardroom table together. We're not in our own offices. Pastor Hannah joined us kind of early in the pandemic, and she keeps saying it's something like the Google of church staff, where we're all around a table and we're all kind of doing our work. And if someone has a question, they'll just ask it. And if someone wants to engage in the dialogue, they will. If someone wants to just keep working on whatever is working, they will. There's often just a fun camaraderie and a teasing and a food sharing. It's just a really great place where we are friends. We hang out outside of the facility. We hang outside of the work that we do together. Getting ready for this kind of conversation, before I agreed to Garth's ask, I sent a note off to all the staff saying, like, before I say yes to this, I don't want to just talk about things that I think are true in my head. I'd like you to actually help me with some of these things. And our admin person, she says, there's a trust and a humor and a sense of freedom that we have towards one another. And then brackets is, Dana literally brought in cupcakes right now as I'm typing this. Ha ha ha. So there's kind of always a sense of just fun and enjoyment and laughter and work together in this culture of trust and freedom and risk and grace and fun. I know that there's all kinds of other things that we could highlight, but these are some of the main ones that try to describe our culture together as a staff, as a church family, as an elders board, et cetera, and whether you're paid or volunteer. I think all these things would be true in whatever ministry that you find yourself in. So that's kind of the culture one. And I know that there's going to be larger dialogues in the building and accountability, but just wanted to start with that space. And if anyone has a comment or a question or seeking more clarity, I'll turn it to Colin here for this one, and then we'll go from there.
All right, Phil. So I've got two questions. They're both kind of around the same thing right now. It's actually just before you got to the culture talk, which is around your kind of formative moments. One was you mentioned about avoiding the things that prayerfully avoiding the things that you didn't enjoy.
Yes.
This person said they assume that means you avoid putting your staff in those same situations, not that you avoid doing it now that you're in the lead.
Oh, yeah. I work hard to avoid putting them in those same situations and creating for them the exact same dynamics that I did not enjoy, whether it was at camp or whether it was at several of the churches I worked at before. So yeah, no, that's a good point of clarification. It was, I want to, for them, not create those same spaces of frustration or heartache or in the worst moments, anger.
Wonderful. And the second one was also around that same talk, and just said, what if these unwanted elements are necessary? What if they're unavoidable? There
is always part of the work that is not fun. But the things that, and we'll get to it in a moment. I think that will get clearer. There's a difference between being overly involved in the day-to-day micromanaging of a staff, and you have to fill in your expense form because there's a way the finance team needs that to be done so that that's done right. So there's always going to be this kind of like minutia stuff that you just have to do, that everyone has to do, that has to be done a particular way, et cetera, et cetera. But it's more in the how we relate together as people, quote unquote, the lead pastor and the other pastors. It's more those spaces that I'm referring to when it comes to the stuff that we just have to do. There's always going to be tables that have to be moved. There's always going to be stuff that we do that isn't necessarily in our job descriptions. That's not really what I'm getting at. It's more that the structural systems of accountability, the structural things of vision casting and goal setting, those are the elaborate more in the accountability section of our time together.
Okay, wonderful. And one more question just did come in about risk in particular. And it was, the question is interesting. It's formulated around protecting versus giving that trust and freedom that you spoke of as well to take those risks, recognizing in Baptist churches that many people like to have their own voice heard. And so how do you create that culture, not only within your staff, but within the church, to allow the church to allow people to have that freedom to take those risks?
I'll say that back to you and tell me if this is right. So if someone, how do we create a place where people feel free to take risks?
Yeah. And again, it's focused not so that, not so that your staff know that you are giving them the freedom, but within that church culture, the broader church culture, that freedom is there, that they can take those risks, that they're not going to get their hand slapped at a annual business meeting or that type of thing.
Sure. I think there's two big things that help that culture be defined and created. One, when someone comes to me or you with an idea, the answer 99% of the time is like, yeah, we can do that. And then if it goes bad, we don't chop their hands off. Like there's that space of, and after a while, when people begin asking the question, can we do this? And if the answer is more than likely to be yes, that becomes contagious in the context of a community of people, because they'll share their experience with me or with Gordon or with Tyler, whoever, about, yeah, like we really had the heart to do this. And we approached Phil or one of the staff, and they were like all in quick, and they were quick to give us a budget line. They were quick to empower us with, other people who have similar hearts or whatever. So there's that space of like saying yes to those moments that might seem risky, but then if it goes bad, that you're like, all right, like it's not how we all thought it was going to go. It's not necessarily where the person wanted it to go. And it didn't end with they were bad for trying, and now they have to somehow make reconciliation for, like, it's a quick yes to the request. And if it doesn't go as well as everybody thought and hoped, we try not to like get mad at one another for those kinds of moments, and we just kind of move on to whatever the next thing is. And often there's like we'll start it here, we'll run it for this long, see how it goes. That's kind of a guardrails thing that we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think those two things of saying yes quickly will catch on in a culture very, very fast. And then if it doesn't go well, if they don't go back to their friends and say, man, like that didn't go well, and they were really upset with me, without those two things, I think it creates a space where that will slowly just grow inside a community of faith.
Great.
All right, let's go on to this next one, building. And this is like the kind of who we look for. And again, this is like paid or volunteer. it really doesn't matter. And kind of who we look for as we build teams of people in the context of who we are across our 3 sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the first one, and this sounds funny and it sounds so obvious, but it really does matter. Like the person, paid or volunteer, they have to have a love for Jesus. Like, it has to be obvious. It has to be a normal part of their dialogue, that they talk about Jesus and what he's doing in their life as readily as they would talk about any other thing in their life. And that's a big piece for us, is that if you can talk about your love for and your desire to grow in Christ, when we're not asking you to talk in that particular way, we tend to keep a mental note of those people. And though that's just a big part of people who are deeply engaged in the ministry of our church, people who have a love for the Lord that is just obvious in their day-to-day. That's number one. Number two, they have to have a desire for others to love Jesus as well. That they have this deep commitment to the Lord, and that they want to see others come to know and walk with the Lord as well is a big one, because that creates all kinds of spaces of grace for people, all kinds of spaces for patience with people, that the net is wide on that front end as people get engaged in ministry. And these two, although they seem like, well, of course, well, sometimes we overlook these ones and think, oh, everyone that goes to church loves Jesus. Everyone that goes to church has a desire for others to love Jesus. And unfortunately, that's not has been my experience. There's an awful lot of people who attend that don't really have a love for the Lord, and they don't really have a desire for others to love him either. So those two, although they seem simple, there are significant aspects for our staff, our volunteers, as we kind of build purposeful teams in one way or another. The third one, this might sound funny, but they have to be very personable. There are people, and I love them dearly, that are just super awkward to be around. They don't understand personal space. They don't understand breath. They don't understand. They're just all kinds of things, and I love them dearly. We have loads of them here, but but the personable side is rough. They can be short with their tongue. They can be quick with their temper. They can be all kinds of things, and they just kind of trip over themselves. We try to avoid that one for kind of those key spaces. But people who are very personable, they can talk easy, they can relate to others well. Those are big spaces when it comes to our building of team, staff, and key volunteers all the time. Communication skills. This is one that's kind of fun, where I grew up in an environment in my church where you have them too, and you'll know what I mean when I say it. If you were to ask so-and-so to pray, they would pray in a way where you're like, who's that guy? Who's that girl? Like, where did that version of that person come up with? Like, where did that person arrive from? Where, like, I want someone who that can just talk normally, that can communicate with conviction, that has interpersonal skills in their language, and all of those kinds of things are just big pieces of building good teams. And you know them in your church. I know them in our church. That is just a part that goes a long way in how we form an email that can be filled with grace, or that can be very cutting. That initial word, that initial contact is one that is just one that's more often positive than it is negative. And those are just big things that we look for in the kind of communication side of the people that we work with and try to hire on staff, whether it's full-time or part-time roles. And then our key leaders, whether it be in nursery or all the way up to men's and women's ministries in the life of our church family. The last one is this is a big one, because it'll tie into the next one well, is that you have to be excited to get up in the morning yourself. If the amount of trust and the amount of freedom that you have, you've got to be able to be excited to go to work, and motivate yourself to do a lot, because I'm not going to do that stuff for you. Gordon, Hannah, we're not going to do that stuff for you. You have to be able to do all of the little things that are needed to be done to do those ministries well. And we just love it when you have this desire to move in this way on your own, without someone always calling, always emailing, always texting. Are you good? Are you going to be here on time? Are you looking after all these details? Our key leaders, they would have all of these things and more that are just wonderful to work with and work alongside, to give them giant areas of responsibility, giant budget lines that they can lead others well. So as we build teams, those are kind of the people that we look for. People who love Jesus deeply, people that have a desire for others to love Jesus deeply, that are really personable, that they're really enjoyable to be around, that they have some communication skills that are not off-putting, is the best way to say it, and that these people love to get up in the morning. They love to, they're people that just love to do stuff, and that I don't have to hold their hand and kind of encourage them in the you said you do this and now you're not doing this, and those are some of the qualities, I guess, that we look for in our staff and our people that volunteer in the life of our church. That's this one, and the next one it'll be a little bit more lengthy, but these set kind of the foundation for the next one, which I suspect some will find it difficult. Any questions or comments around those things?
So Phil, there's been a couple of questions come in the chat that I'll just kind of bring out to make sure we all see those. First one I see, actually there's a few here, is how do you build those desirable behaviors and attitudes in those who may be a little less than perfect, which of course we all are.
Say that again, Colin.
How do you build those desirable behaviors and attitudes in those who might be less perfect?
These people are not perfect. Like, even the ones that hold all these things, they are far from perfect. And sometimes when we create these lists, we create this like a version of a human that's not really accurate. Like, someone can hold 3 of these or 5 of these or all, like, and 10 more things that aren't even here. And they are keenly aware they're not perfect. That's part of they're quite personable, and they can talk about their own mistakes and failures. And there's a grassroots organicness to it that is very much inviting. So just because someone has these things and maybe a few more, or maybe 1 or 2 less, I think it would be a mistake to say that person is somehow, arrived, or they're perfect in that kind of quotations sense of the word. Because I would say the people that I work with, this would describe Pastor Hannah. This would describe Gordon. This would describe Tyler. This would describe Lindsay, our lead women's leader. This would describe Amos. And they are far from perfect. They would be the first ones to speak of that. And I think that just speaks well into a culture of, like, you don't have to be all-stars. Like, you don't have to be Wayne Gretzky. You don't have to be these unattainable people. These are ordinary people that love the Lord well, but are deeply flawed. And that's obvious as we work together.
Okay. So do you have a means by which you try to kind of build or develop some of these things in your staff, though?
We certainly love to give people opportunity to talk about what is Jesus doing in your life, to give as many different platforms for that. I think of some of our men's and women's gatherings where we're always looking for kind of one of our own to be the speaker, where it develops them and kind of forces them into, man, if I had 7 minutes or 8 minutes to talk about this, what would that look like and sound like? So we're trying to kind of celebrate that priesthood of all believers and give people opportunities to share and speak and lead and preach. And it's rough at first, because sometimes, like, we have one of our folks is preaching here on the 6th of March. He's never done that before. And that morning will be awesome for all kinds of reasons, but it will also be awful for all kinds of other reasons. And that's okay. That would be one of the main ways we try to develop our people, is to give them those spaces to speak in front of their peers and friends, to grow their communication skills, to grow their ability to talk about their love of the Lord, which inevitably they become personable, because we're all a lot more alike than we realize. So that would be one of the main ways we do it.
Okay. There are several questions here, Phil. So what I'm going to do, the next one, I think you can probably answer with, if you have one of these, just
Okay.
throw it the tool that you use. Do you have a spiritual gift identifying tool that you use?
No. No, it is not. We don't.
Okay. No, that's fair. Obviously there are ones that people can look up if they were interested.
There's all kinds that are out there. But we don't do that. Okay. So there's two more. I'll just quickly run through these with you. One is, do you find there's a place for ministry within your team for people who maybe aren't quite so personable or don't have those great communication skills? Yes. So that's a great question. And the real joy that I love about ministry is trying to find spaces for everyone to use whatever gift that God has given to them. It's not all the, pastors, teachers, leaders, like those big ones. We love spaces of mercy, gifts, and care and compassion. So a lot of our people that are very much behind the scenes, that would never in a million years ask to lead, want any minutes in any pulpit at any time for any study, for any kind of group of people, but they love people. So those individuals are often on our pastoral care team. So if someone is going through a difficult season of life, we have this giant roster of people that we email and say, hey, Garth is having a bad week. He's lost his mom, and here's his email and phone number and address. And there's like 30, 40 people that would write a card or send an email or cook a meal and take it over to him, all behind the scenes. Like, no one would ever see that stuff being done. And that person loves to be able to serve in those kinds of ways behind the scenes, away from, shall we say, this list of things. And people have found great spaces of ministry in that one. We have other people that love hospitality. Like they don't ask me to do a devotion, don't ask me to lead a study, but I can do an incredible workshop on, and this is going to sound dumb. We have the Canadian champion for mustard pickles that goes to our church. And she's like, I can't do any of these things that most people do in church life, but I can do this. And I'm like, great. We have an amazing kitchen. Here's a bag of money. You go teach 15 people how to make mustard pickles. And they're unaware that they're accomplishing community. They're unaware that there's people that are meeting each other for the first time and that new friendships will be formed. They're unaware that there's someone from the town that has showed up because they have a heart for mustard pickles that we didn't know. So we try hard to create spaces for anyone to use their gifts. It might be a simple one-off on a Saturday, but we try hard to kind of honor the giftedness of people and celebrate what they do well, without trying to get them all to fit this one particular list that I have here. There's a host of other qualities and characteristics that we could really highlight that necessarily aren't the team leaders of things, but are serving in just incredible ways. The first Thursday of every month, we have a love kitchen crew. I'm not a fan of the name, but whatever. They come in and they just bake. They just make hundreds of meals on the first Thursday of every month, and they just go into the freezer. And then the pastoral care team comes along when Garth is down and out, and they just deliver food to Garth with a card, and no devotionals given, no like obvious leadership things are done, but all kinds of wonderful ministry and community and involvement and engagement is happening at the same time.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks, Phil. So food goes to Garth, mustard pickles, they can come to me.
Yes, they're fantastic, by the way.
Last question that we have here for this section, because your last point that you had here is about being self-motivated.
Yep.
So how do you build that team culture that is productive and motivated while not leading to a ministry that's full of workaholics?
I'm trying to just frame my answer right. It becomes a malformed love of Jesus if I'm working myself to death. It becomes a malformed desire to see others love Jesus well if I am not at home with my own kids to see them love the Lord well. If there is a staff member who would be guilty of that, it would be me. But at the same time, I am the staff member that shows up at 7 so I can leave each day at 2:30 or 3 to be home for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon when my children are home, to be with my wife, to check in on all those fronts. So I think just by example for me, in the context of where I am, trying to demonstrate you don't have to give your soul here because there's far better things. I know, like one of our site pastors, Pastor Tyler, they just had their third, and he called. This would be like last week, two Thursdays ago, and he's like, "I need to be home more." And I'm like, "Yes, you do, Haley." And and I'm like, "Put your office in your basement. Like, I don't care. Like, do the bare minimum that you need to do to get ready for Sunday, because people have a lot of latitude for those seasons of life. You don't have to drive into Cornwall. You don't have to do those kinds of things. Do what you need to do to survive early childhood in home when nothing is normal anymore." So I think kind of by example, and then just creating spaces of grace for people to go at the pace they need to go at from time to time.
Thank you, Bill.
All righty. Well, let's go to this last one, this accountability piece. And this is like, I suspect it will be not at all what some of you think. For some of the ones that know me, this will be counter to what you'd read in a lot of leadership material. And this would be one of the direct outcomes of kind of my dad saying to me when I was 19, 20, if you're ever in a lead role, kind of like do for them the things that you don't want to happen to you and those experiences, if you will. So number one, we have no targets at all in the context of our ministry. There is not a 5-year plan. There's not a vision statement beyond Matthew 28. There are not metrics that staff have to meet. There is nothing. There are no targets in the context of who we are. And hopefully you're like, oh, that's why a love for Jesus, like just some of the other things that we've talked about so far really plays into this aspect of the conversation. But it's weird where the church I am fortunate enough to work in and for, some would often ask me, like, you know, what are your goals? Like, we don't have any goals. We don't have any. Sorry, we have goals. We don't have stated goals. We don't have an acronym on the wall. We don't have a war room that we retire to. We don't have anything like that whatsoever, other than we just want to see people come to know Christ and grow in their love for him and get caught up in this incredible work that God has invited us into through his son, Jesus. So number one, we have absolutely no targets, which means that no one feels pressure to perform, to lie, to cheat, to over-exaggerate on what's actually happening in their ministries. We have a very simple philosophy called be on the ready. This is not mine. This is from Craig Rochelle in one line that I read of his years and years and years ago, where in the run of a year, we just want people to be on the ready for an opportunity that we did not see coming, that we can move quickly to respond to. I'll give you an example of that. One of our best and greatest ministries was a complete mistake is not the right word, but no one could have thought or planned or anything other than an opportunity came and we were quick to say yes. And we have been able to form a unique relationship with the public school board where we feed 300 plus children every weekend through a ministry called Kids of Kindness, where we drop off food every Thursday to schools across the island. It goes directly into the hands of the guidance counselor. They put it directly into the book bag of kids that come from homes that have no food, and they go home. That has created a kind of partnership with the school board that is very unique in an age when school boards don't want to get involved with religious organizations, particularly Christian ones. And that was all born out of Be on the Ready. Pastor Hannah, when she arrived, it was too funny, where the town of Cornwall noticed that we did a lot of things with kids. So they sent their embassy over to talk with Hannah. And anyway, after a month and a half of dialogue, they stopped doing all of their youth things and gave money to Hannah through our youth ministry to do all kinds of things kind of on their behalf, simply just by being kind of on the ready. So we try hard to pay attention to that person that comes to us and says, hey, I have an idea. That would be an example of, like, on the ready, you can do a pickles thing and we'll see where that goes. You can do this thing and we'll see where that goes. You can do this thing and we'll see where that goes. So we have no targets at our annual meeting. It's a boring annual meeting. It is passing a budget that has no targets in mind, and just be wanting to be ready for what might come our way in the run of that year. This is the bag of money. So if Ron Scott is on our staff, or he's one of our key leaders, or a leader that we don't even know yet, and Ron says, hey, I have this real heart to do this. Could I? The answer is, yep, you can. And I probably know one or two others that might have a similar heart of Ron. And I instantly have a bag of money. It could be $100. It could be $1,000 that we will find in our budget to see what God will do through Ron. And that's just a lot of fun to be able to do that, which creates a culture of, like, risk and trust and all of those kinds of things that celebrates the giftedness of the body across our 3 sites. And we get to tell those stories in wonderful ways when God begins to move in someone that we didn't there's some jadedness that I have in these conversations where, you know, leaders often can get in pulpits and talk about how God has spoken to them clearly, and then COVID arrives, and I'm like, how come we didn't tell you about that? Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. So we just try to be on the ready with bags of money or resources to help people in small, simple things. So when I say bag of money, you're like, oh, you're a big rich church. No, that might be $20 to the dollar store to get thank you cards that someone just wants to write to a whole bunch of people. So it's from the small little things to big things as those opportunities arise. The fourth one, good work will be obvious. Like, good work is just obvious. In my entire time here now, this is year 19, good work shows itself to be good work, and you're celebrated for that. I don't have to create targets and structures of accountability to discover or weed out bad work. Like that's just going to always show itself. Those people are always going to move on, whether they're paid or volunteer. Good work will always be obvious in the context of a ministry, and there's fruit that will be obvious. There will be wonderful gospel things that come from that. So good work will be obvious. And the last one on accountability is my role, and for right or for wrong, at least this is how it gets played out here. I simply am the guardrail. So if Ron or Garth or anyone comes and says, hey, I have an idea, I just try to create the lane that they have to stay in. And it's an often wide lane, but I just try to create guardrails for them. Like, I know of that ditch over there, and if you don't listen to me, you're probably going to go in that ditch over there, and it'll make it more awkward for you and awkward for me, and those grace will abound and you'll still be fine. But we would love for you to stay inside the guardrails, whether that's a staff. So Pastor Han and I will be talking and should be talking about ideas in the future, or Tyler or whoever, and they'll come with ideas. And I'm like, that's a great idea. Just keep these things in mind. And they'll keep those things in mind, and away they go. And I kind of liken it to a bowling alley when those, like, the fake gutters pop up, so that no matter what you do, you're always going to knock down pins. And I try to create a space where no matter what you do, you're going to knock down pins at the end. It might be one, but the goal is to try to knock down as many as we can. So I just try to create those guardrails or those bumpers that ensure that the ball is headed in the right direction. And I don't really care what it looks like between those guardrails. That's where God's gifted you and called you, and freedom of expression, all of those kinds of things get played out in that moment. So in our system, in our culture, we don't have targets. We don't have this tyranny to perform. No one's reporting back to me or the elders board or the church family about, we only had 4% growth last year, and you don't get a raise. That's just not present in our culture at all when it comes to accountability. It's a very simple, just be on the ready. I don't have to conjure up. I don't have to go looking for work and ministry to be done. It often will present itself right in front of us if we would just but get over ourselves and pay attention to those things, rather than trying to think that I have to be the one to think of a 5-year plan and all that kind of stuff. It has been my experience that God's people are generous when presented with opportunities of what God's doing, and that creates bags of money for God's people to use and steward well in the work that we're called to do. That good work, it's obvious, and if it's bad work, well, it won't get done again by the person who first thought of it. Like, I don't have to tell them it didn't go bad. Like, I don't have to be the one, like, because they know that. It might be, all right, let's move over here. Let's rethink this entirely. Is it worth doing at all? Is there something else that you love to do that we could move you over into that space? and whoever and wherever, it's just trying to create spaces of guardrails for staff and volunteers to stay inside, shall we say, the lanes, so that something really tragic doesn't happen. So those are like the three big pieces that would define our team and our culture in the context of who we are here in the ministry.
I think there's a lot of processing going on, Phil. I haven't got any questions that have come in on this one yet, but a lot of really good stuff there. Although I'm sure some are wondering, how big are the bags of money that you give out?
So the smallest one would be about 20, and the largest one is $15,000 to our Celebrate Recovery people who, by God's grace, said, like, you need to work with people who struggle in areas of hurts and habits and addictions. And what started in their basement has grown into an all-encompassing Wednesday night service, catered meals, and they have $15,000 to work with. Which now, which is funny, someone else in the church funds it because they love that, but they can't do it themselves. So that would be the scale of bags of money. And that would be our single largest ministry budget line over anything else, and it has nothing to do with paid staff. All volunteer led.
What would happen, Phil, if you have set the guardrails for someone?
Yep.
And being a self-starter motivator, they move beyond the guardrail. What happens in that moment?
Sure. The first thing would be a very simple, kind of grace-filled, help me understand why we moved outside of whatever. And sometimes that guardrail is adjusted, like, oh, okay, I can actually see why you moved outside the guardrail. So we, in that moment, would redefine that guardrail. If that guardrail can't be redefined and they want to persist in that space, then it's an easy conversation to the chair of our elders board. And when I say easy, it's not like a 3 seconds later I'm on the call to David, but it would be like multiple, like, we really would love for you not to do that or say that or to move in this direction. And after several runs at it, the conversation would come to our elders board. And it's only happened, I think, once in my life here, where the elders had to step in to say, like, that's not how we, and these things are so, I guess I'm thinking of two situations. They're so egregious that it's obvious. Like, one had to do with, like, no, you're not going to send Facebook messages to teenage girls as a leader. Like, you're not going to do that. Like they're so far outside of what is normal and healthy and safe anyway, that I'm like, you really want to try to argue that that's a good ministry play to have dialogue with. So the two times where the ones did not want to heed guardrails, it becomes like a weird moment to say, all right, well, I know how this is going to end if you want to make this something larger than what it needs to be, because they're so far outside of the realm of normal, and some still want to push on it. So after multiple conversations, there comes a moment where it's lateral to the elders board for them to work with me, with them to solve the issue.
Okay. A couple of other questions have popped up here. First person says they assume that this accountability structure was not always in place, always true at Cornerstone. So how did you cultivate this grace among the congregation?
I don't know when or where. Yeah, like there isn't a moment where it's kind of like, all right, we're going to shift to do this. It's just more of a how I have always remembered it to be. And I am someone, like, even getting ready for today, I'm like, oh goodness, like, to do the work of like writing down and thinking through what we are, that's hard work for me. Like, I don't, that's work for me. Like, I don't find that enjoyable. It's just more like, let's just keep celebrating what's working. These things seem to be working. And when I say working, I'm not talking about like some formula that we have somewhere, but it's people love working here. People enjoy the community of faith here. And I want to throw as much flammable liquid on those practices that seem to create community and joy and life and gospel stories. So there wasn't a moment in 2009 when we said, hey, let's shift to this. It's just with one Ron Scott at a time asking to do a mustard pickles day. And after 4 or 5 years of those, it begins to change that ethos from the inside out. And it just kind of naturally took over, so to speak.
So safe to say that it's somewhat, your leadership style would be somewhat intuitive based in terms of like what you've just described. It's kind of based on, this feels right. This is what I think and I perceive from the advice that I've had in my past. And you kind of run intuitive more so than this is what the book said to do. Yeah.
I don't know what the book says to do, other than let people who love the Lord, who have gifts, do what they are called and passionate about doing. And in some ways, I try to preach really well on Sunday morning. I work closely with our elders board and finance team. And anyone else who has an idea, the answer is yes. Like, yeah, you can do that here. And they bring their friends in to help them do that. And it's been wonderful to, well, there's just so many examples of our women's ministry. It grew from two moms that had babies, and they said, like, hey, we're bored through the day. Do you think we could have some money to start a mom's group? And we're like, yeah, that's easy, because I can't start a mom's group. That's weird. And after 15 years, there's 150 women involved in women's ministry, and a team of 9 that prayerfully get together once a month to think through and plan through. And all we did was say yes, and here's some resources that you can use to do it. And as that ministry has grown, we've had to figure out what are some of the guardrails in the context of our 3 sites. There's some dynamics that we have to be mindful of there. But I enjoy the notebook and chapter things of leadership. I think it's more like, yeah, you're someone who loves the Lord, and you seem to be someone that really wants to move some things, and I just want to be able to facilitate that as best I can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I have a question about doing evaluations with your staff, where you don't have targets.
Yep.
What does a staff evaluation look like? Without those targets, especially. What do those evaluations look like?
We don't really have them. There isn't a report card, so to speak, of our staff at any point. There's a weekly, how's everybody doing? Prayerful, like, how can we, like, I try hard to find out how the staff's doing in their personal life. Like, how are things at home? How are things with your spouse? How are things with your kids? And often the off weeks, it's not because they don't like the ministry. It's just that's the tough week. And so we go forward together, knowing that there's going to be those kinds of seasons, but we don't have that type of evaluation system at all, and report cards. They know, I know when I'm doing good work and bad work. And I don't find it helpful. Colin, you know me well enough that if someone comes along and says, man, that was really bad, I'm like, thanks for telling me. That was really uplifting. Like, I don't need someone to tell me that was a bad sermon. Like, I know that. Like, and I try to do work in such a way that I don't create that again. And that seems to be something that our crew really values, that I don't have to say that was a bad day. They know that, they're aware of that. And we want to be able to cheer them on so that the next day is better. When it comes, I know there's always the like, well, how do you fire someone if it's really bad? Well, in the two places where that's true, they came to realize that their time was just done, and no HR catastrophes, no, we like lovingly walk with them through that process of discovery. But we don't have a quarterly review. We don't have there's certainly I will often say to the crew, like, carbon me or CC me on your week, what it looks like, so I can answer intelligently what you're doing, so that when someone asks me, what's Tyler doing this week? Like, I have some sense of what he's doing with his time. There's times where our elders board would say, for the next 2 weeks, we just want you to track what you do so that we can see, like, are you really doing what you love to do? Are you doing things that we don't want you to be doing? And that guardrail conversation. But there's not when someone talks of staff evaluation, when I go away to leadership conferences and seminars, my hands get really sweaty and clammy, and I feel bad about myself because I don't do that at all. And everything I'm reading and have been told I should be doing that, and we don't. So we don't have that evaluation as I think of what that evaluation is, and as I've heard it described in other environments. That doesn't happen here.
Okay, thank you. There are some other questions that are coming in. Most of these are on the chat right now. One of those is, so that check-in that you do with your staff, do you do something similar for your volunteers as well? Yeah,
that's a good question. I try to spend a lot of time with our key people. And there's probably 10 to 12, maybe 15 in Cornwall. And I try hard to give those individuals whatever time they need from me, because they're big drivers of the ministry. They shape a lot of people. They have been entrusted with a lot of treasure and resources. And I try to be that person's kind of biggest cheerleader in the work that they're doing. So if someone were to email me to say, hey, can we get together on Thursday? I'll do all that I can to clear my schedule to connect with that person. And if I haven't heard from them in 2 or 3 months, I will certainly fire off a note to say, hey, like, thinking of you, how are things going? How can I pray for you? So there's certainly the easy staff one on the Monday mornings where we do that stuff. But then with our key volunteers, I try to check in with them, if I haven't heard from them, every 2 to 3 months, anyway, on a personal level, that I can pastor them well in whatever season they're going through.
Okay, thank you. I think that's probably about it for the questions right now. I do have some other that have kind of questions that have come in, but you've kind of answered most of those. Just checking one other that just came in.
Just looking back through the
so there is one that clearly you have indicated you give your team a lot of freedom.
Yep.
And you've mentioned a couple of times about when people come to you and say, here's an idea. You kind of mentioned, here's the bag of money, now go and do it. How much hands-on guidance and leadership will you give in those? Will you be present at those activities? just for one, or for ongoing, or for none? What does that look like for you personally?
For the vast majority of those things, if they need me to open the door and disarm the church building, then that's what I do. I don't have the time to be present at all of them. I don't have. It's not that I don't have the interest. I have a lot of interest in it, but I don't have the ability to be present for all of those kinds of things. So I know it sounds weird, but if Ron comes to me and says, "Hey, can we?" I'm using Ron because he's the top picture that I see in my window here. After a couple coffees with Ron, kind of teasing out whatever those details are, look, Ron's on his own, knowing that he has some treasure and knowing that he's got people cheering for him, and that whatever he needs, he can call or email at any time, and I'll be there to help. And once it becomes something significant, then the elders and myself will begin putting we'll kind of more formalize, okay, now we actually need a team of people around this, and away we go.
Okay. That's great. I do believe that is the questions that have come in, Phil. So I'll toss it back over to Garth here. Thanks so much, though, Phil.
Thanks, Colin, for helping us out with the questions. And Phil, we want to thank you for taking time to be with us today. For me, it's always great to hear you talk. You've become someone who's created space for a lot of our young leaders, and I have a deep appreciation for that. And so I just appreciate you sharing some of how you and Cornerstone have helped create the space for the teams to develop. And so thanks a lot for that.